Hey, so you're interested in Franz Kafka. Well, you're interested in an app about him. So no, I'm not here to show off this because, well, it's all backwards. And I'm not here to show off this because I'm not even sure if you can read this, even though it's backwards. The print is so much like the background color. But I am here to show off this. And since it's showing up backwards and you can't read it, I just made it the wallpaper on my phone so that you can read it. This guy, right here, Franz Kafka. The book is an analysis of his biography, written by David Zane Morowitz. The illustrations are done by Robert Crumb. It is a masterful portrayal visually because the illustrations really did match almost exactly what my imagination of what Franz Kafka's writings looked like. But the most important thing is that you want to read Franz Kafka's writings. For that, you will need this app right here. Move a little closer. This app right here. And I'll show you how to get to it. Go to the Playstore and do a search for Franz Kafka. And most likely, he'll be the first app that shows up in your search. You're not looking for an ebook. No. You're looking for the app. Look for this guy's name right here because there might be other things called the Franz Kafka, Complete Franz Kafka, but this is the one. Now, when I first downloaded the app, a bunch of the stuff was missing, but as he said in an email that he responded to me, that it's a work in progress, it's one of his life projects, and he's been working on it consistently since then. I did comment in my post when I went back to edit it that he has added some of the stuff that I said was missing, and he's changed the interface. So let me see if I can show you a few of the other comments here. This app is awesome. Everyone deserves to read Kafka. That's another important point that I want to talk about in this video because I'm not just trying to show you how to find this thing, I'm also trying to sell you on it. Yes, this is a fanboy thing, but also a marketing thing because I'm helping the developer get the word out about his app. But I'm not just merely blindly trying to sell it. I really do love this app. And it's partly what helped me learn to appreciate Franz Kafka. So let me first show off the app. It comes up with these barred entries. There is the collected stories. Every option comes up with a book cover first, and then highlighted buttons for each story, or in the case of the novels, each chapter. I'm going to come back to this because I want to show off some important stories that Kafka had written. But there is The Trial. These are all the original translations done. So they're in the public domain, so I don't think he's going to have any issues with copyright infringement. Yeah, there it is. T. Willa and Edwin Muir. But he has in here the complete text of The Trial, The Castle, including all the unnamed chapters, and of course, the infamous, it's a long chapter, infamous last chapter that ends in mid-sentence. And again, I'm going to come back and talk about that. America. I haven't actually read America yet, but it is completely here. Notice an important thing, the Stoker is something that Franz Kafka had written as a short story separately before working on America, and he had published it. So he's included it both as the chapter opening for the... And of course, the famous Metamorphosis with the original book cover that Kafka had published it with. This is not a recent issue. This is the original artwork that was published with it. And of course, it's simply just divided into parts 1, 2, and 3. But I want to show off something unique and different about Kafka's writing. Notice how the paragraphs are extremely long. Now, the app is built not for page breaks, but simply to scroll the text. This can get a little bit annoying if you're trying to read a long chapter and you get interrupted and you have to put your phone to sleep or exit the app and come back to it. It'll come back probably, no, it won't come back still on that chapter, but if you put it to sleep, it'll come back still on that chapter, but back at the top of the page. So you'll have to scroll down again to find the place where you were at to continue reading. But aside from what we see as paragraph breaks, a lot of Kafka's original writings did not include paragraph breaks for things like dialogue. I think it's more obvious in his novels. When more than one person is talking, there are not separate paragraphs for each person talking. Literally, there will be one person talking, and then the next person talking in the same paragraph. You're just going to have to get used to that. That's the way they wrote back then. He didn't modify it for our modern sensibilities. He said, no, I'm going to present this to you in the original form. As I noted in my comments, the only essay that's right here, as of the filming of this video, is Airplanes at Brescia. The other essays he has not put in yet, but Airplanes at Brescia is here. Oh, by the way, yes, when you're in each section, you can scroll left and right to just go between the entries in it, and it'll take you back to the main menu. Another important thing to look for here is other letters. The famous letter to his father is here. He hasn't put in the other letters, other letters yet, but he put the most important one. Franz Kafka's letter to his father is probably one of the most famous pieces of correspondence in literary history, but I don't want to get into too much about that right now. Right now, I wanted to get into a little bit of discussion about the situation of Kafkaesque. A lot of study has been done, and I want to show off a couple of things where you can actually go and look into this situation. Here are some thumbnails from videos. My friend Simon Whistler did a wonderful video on the biography of Franz Kafka in his delightfully British portrayal of gravity and seriousness. He gives it a very thorough treatment of the biography, including pictures from Kafka's childhood, and some decent discussions about the books and the stuff that Kafka has written. The Thug Notes Trial basically is a video bringing classic works of literature to modern readers in a modern style with, dare I say it, ebonics, but it's very, very slang narration. It does treat the story very seriously and covers it very, very well, but it's very, very slang. The video here is a TED Talk on what makes something Kafkaesque, because a lot of people think they understand Kafkaesque, or perhaps know what it means, but can't quite explain it to themselves. And this video and this one here both talk about it very thoroughly and extravagantly, although the voices to present the material, it can be a bit nerdy. So take that with a grain of salt. Personally, I preferred Simon Whistler because he has the British polish and dramatic voice, theatric voice, that really gives the portrayal the kind of seriousness it needs. But I wanted to point out a few oddities before I get into much more serious things. Back in 2009, Charlie the Unicorn did a live YouTube thing where he had to defeat a weasel who was going to trick him into going into a door. And in Charlie the Unicorn Grand Finale Part 1, oddly, Nyx, the whatever that thing is, the platypus monster who's trying to study the tower, is led by a weasel to that same door. And unfortunately, the weasel ends up getting killed in that too. But yes, this is the exact same door. But I bring up Charlie the Unicorn because the Council of Weasels is extremely Kafkaesque. It's probably the only thing about Charlie the Unicorn that is specifically Kafkaesque, but it clearly is. I forget the name. Norwell, the main weasel who speaks, is awkward and aggravating to listen to, but he is very, very Kafkaesque. And I really appreciated that one aspect of the story in the grand finale. Other things I wanted to show off, yes, I'm a big Rush fan, and Rush 2112, some people might disagree with me, but I think that the world of Rush 2112 is very Kafkaesque. The priests at the Temple of Syrinx rule their people without concern to the people's actual welfare or needs. And again, later when I discuss actually Kafkaesque things, I think you'll find that that might be a very good description. Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. In some sense, it is Kafkaesque, especially the segments of Welcome to the Machine and Have a Cigar. The world of Pink Floyd was very Kafkaesque. But back to our seriousness. Here is a cartoon done by Robert Crumb in that book that I'm showing off to you, the orange book with the green square. Very significant that Franz Kafka handing a copy of one of his books to his father, saying, all of my writing is about you. And in some certain sense, this is true. But it shows the quality of Robert Crumb's illustrations and the meaning of them to this biography. What else do I want to show off here? Deep Purple Stormbringer. No, it's not at all Kafkaesque. I just show it off because I'm a big Deep Purple fan too, and I just wanted to show off their prettiest album cover. Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Brain Salad Surgery, including their classic monster hit Carnival 9. And yes, the world of Carnival 9 is extremely Kafkaesque. Don't let anyone tell you it's not. A quote from Franz Kafka: I never wish to be easily defined. There are a number of quotes that he has. The developer of the app has a section called the Zero Aphorisms, which includes a few, it's 109 entries from the first book that he published, but apparently there was a later publication of like 40 aphorisms that he hasn't included yet. But again, keep in mind that this is a work in progress for the developer. He's still working on it. I wanted to show off this delightful picture of Kate Elliott grimacing about the Yeti who's humping a tree in the background. And one of my delightful memes that I made for the internet to have a joke at their own expense. I've often noticed a lot of memes are posted by people with the intent of sharing their meaning and not caring about the misspellings in them. This goes right up the alley with people who say your and there and is writing one when they mean the other one. Is that all I have to show off here? Of course, there's also my taste for Wandroid, an Android-based game for phones and probably tablets. I don't have a tablet, so I don't know if it'll work on a tablet or not, but right now I'm playing Wandroid 4, Pollution of the Heart, and it's a delightfully challenging game. Not at all anything like a Match 3 game, so feel free to dive into that one. I have videos for that too. But the other thing I wanted to do is talk to you about probably my favorite movie of all time, Brazil. Terry Gilliam's Brazil. It is extremely Kafkaesque and possibly also Orwellian. I'm going to leave the distinction between those two notions to you, but Brazil portrays a delightfully hectic and very business and bureaucratic oriented world. heavily populated workplaces with a lot of paperwork and a lot of procedures that don't really make a whole lot of sense. But that's something that a lot of people who study Kafka really come to fully understand. And if you really want to understand Kafkaesque, you really need to read The Trial in the Castle. But when you go into a workplace, you're dealing with people who are frightened of their bosses and panicked at any intrusion into their workplace. This is Sam Lowry trying to get his neighbor, Harvey Lime, to stop dragging his desk through the wall. And, of course, Harvey Lime misinterprets the intrusion as being, you just want to steal my chair, I can't spare my chair, I've only got one left, I need that to sit on. But that's not really the crux of the movie. The most Kafkaesque scene in the whole movie is this scene where Joe Layton is going to the Ministry of Information to report the wrongful arrest of Buttle when they're supposed to be looking for Tuttle. And she presents her forms to report the wrongful arrest, and the guy says that you have to get it stamped, and he looks at it and he says, no, there's no stamp on it. And he says, you need to go to this other desk, I think it's the information retrieval, to get it stamped. And she says, I've been to information retrieval, they didn't stamp it. And he said, well, I can't accept it without a stamp, and you have to go back there. And she's all frustrated because the procedure is basically designed to allow her to report this wrongful arrest, also prohibit her from reporting the wrongful arrest. I think one thing that is difficult to understand about Kafkaesque absurdism is that, and this was something very clearly portrayed in Kafka's writings, is that Kafkaesque bureaucracy is easily and almost automatically comedic. It's funny as hell to see, well, it's both tragic and funny as hell, but it's funny to see people trying to do normal things in this system that is designed to make it so that normal things can't get done right and effectively. So, I would be remiss if I did not also mention the 1962 classic with Anthony Perkins' portrayal of The Trial, the actual trial movie. I show this off because we have to remember in today's day and age, especially during this pandemic, that in history there used to be workplaces like this. Hundreds of people at tiny little desks in a room surrounded by hundreds of other people, all doing the exact same thing. And in a sense, you are nothing but a number in this corporation, and you are doing nothing but blindly stupid clerical work. And to think that you might be at the focal point of some conspiracy or scandal is just totally inconceivable to these masses of people who are just simply huddled over a desk doing nothing but some menial little task that they get paid a decent wage for, but throughout the course of their lives they never end up progressing, they never end up accomplishing anything unusual or different, but they fulfill the company's needs, and they're paid well for it, and they're appreciated by their bosses, or not. Sometimes bosses are just assholes who treat people like dirt no matter what. But most people's lives were nothing but that menial labor. And that's something very haunting about scenes like this, where he's walking through this huge, long warehouse full of tiny little desks with people sitting at them furiously working calmly and quietly. But yet, this company that he's apparently going into has an industry and can afford to pay this large number of people. But that's all the economics of it. I'm just talking about the emotional reality, the spiritual reality of the situation. But, of course, also, The Trial was an Orson Welles movie, so it's going to have the big, huge, epic-looking scenes, and of course the classic images of a gallery of jurors sitting in balconies, bleachers above an arena for theater. It kind of shows off the difference between the idea of court processes as theater, as spectacle, and to some extent that was shown off, but the most important part of it was the fact that it was a farce. Let me go back to the app. Because I do need to show off something about the collected stories, but I wanted to show off in the trial. There's a famous passage that was published as a short story called Before the Law, that in a later chapter of, where was it? In the cathedral. In the cathedral, the main character runs into a priest in the cathedral, and the cathedral priest tells him about the Before the Law story, basically recites it, and it's very close to the original short story of Before the Law, which is entirely why the app developer made a point of making Before the Law a separate entry in the collected stories, because the version of Before the Law as a short story is different than the portrayal in the trial. Different mostly in wording, but the whole story is actually there in the trial. But other things I wanted to show off in the stories. This is the complete collected stories, including the judgment, the descriptions of a struggle, one of the first stories that Kafka ever published. In the penal colony, one of his more complete stories, a very dramatic and powerful portrayal of justice. Oddly, A Country Doctor, when Kafka was asked one day if he would rescue some of his writings, he said the only thing that he would actually keep is A Country Doctor. When I read The Country Doctor, I thought, wow, that is really bizarre. Why would he consider that the only important thing worth keeping? But it was worth reading. Bizarre, but worth reading. The Hunter Gracchus is a very well-known story, although I really couldn't get into it, but it's also a fragment for it. The Great Wall of China showed Kafka's imagination at the forefront, because he'd never been to China, he'd never done a whole lot of study about the Wall of China, so literally his description of the Wall of China and the meaning of it and the people who built it is entirely made up, and it's pretty clear to us who have internet access to stories and biographies and histories about it. We can look it up in Wikipedia and tell that Franz Kafka was literally just pulling things out of his ass to tell the story. But that's the only criticism I would have of it. The Hunger Artist is a story that he wrote while he was dying. He had a form of tuberculosis that made it painful for him to eat, and so he wrote The Hunger Artist while he was dying, and it's a very powerful story. Tragic, but very powerful. Investigations of a Dog. Very amusing and entertaining story. Again, shows his quality as a writer in the ability to write almost endlessly without being repetitive, and captivating. He was very captivating in his story. You really felt that you were being told about a culture of a pack animal, and you really felt drawn into it. So it's a very, very, very well-written story. The Trees, not the Rush song. Don't be confused. There's another important thing. One of my favorite that I like to show off, if I can find it. I think it's further down the list than this. As you can see, there are a large number of stories that Kafka had written. Very few of them were published, but quite a few of them actually were. But The Cares of a Family Man, I always keep forgetting where I found the idea of the Odradek. The Cares of a Family Man is where to find it. It is a really quite short story, but it totally describes a culture around this inanimate object. So it's a very successfully written story, and the Odradek has been described as an object of existentialism. And that's one thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of The Trial in the Castle, why it's very important for students of philosophy to study both The Trial and the Castle, because personally I don't think that Kafka knew that he was defining absurdism in these two books. One thing I find very important about The Castle is that a lot of people complain about the fact that he left the story unfinished. And personally, sorry about the clicking sound, that's me striking the screen with my finger. You see the complete lack of paragraph breaks. But the fact that he ended the story in mid-sentence, the story goes that he felt that the story wasn't going where he wanted it to go, and he just literally stopped writing in the middle of a sentence. Personally, my belief in knowing the story of the castle, that he knew that there was literally no way to end the story. As I said in one of the descriptions of my poetry in my book, Verses for the Vixen and Other Poems, I said life doesn't end, it just stops. And this was before I studied Franz Kafka, but looking at The Trial, I think that's an important way to understand the novel, is that it doesn't have an ending, it just stops. At some point the main character is going to die, either being in the village or being ostracized from the village, but the story's never going to come to an end. He's never going to, now this is a bit of a spoiler, he's never going to be proven to belong there, nor is he going to be proven to be uninvited. He's going to be constantly, for the entire rest of his life, both in a state of being welcome and unwelcome. And I think that trying to continue to portray that would have just been repetition, and I think that's why Kafka stopped writing it. He just, at that point, he felt that he had portrayed enough of what he needed to say. And so he famously just left the story finished in mid-sentence. But it is still a very powerful story. And I can't remember exactly where. It's either in The Trial or the Castle. There's a famous passage given to an explanation, as an explanation from a secretary, I think in a hotel room or in a meeting room, a conference room type place, that he explained the processes of his job, and it was probably the longest one-sentence tirade that I've ever read that made complete, perfect sense. It showed off the extravagant ability of Franz Kafka to write complete, dense sentences without really losing the reader, that it was entirely captivating and entirely non-repetitive, again with the non-repetition, but that's one thing that I always hate to say is he just never repeated himself. But I can't remember which story it was in. But enough about me fanboying about Kafka. The Trial showed off another portrayal of absurdism, and it really brings to light the misconception of absurdism being comedy. It's not necessarily comedy. The absurd in Kafka's world is actually tragic, but it's best portrayed by comedy because the silliness that results from trying to understand the situation that you're in, or that the main character of the trial is in, just becomes funny. And realistically, that's another element of absurdism, is that when faced with the tragedy of the fact that no matter what you do, nothing's going to come to fruition, you're going to end up dying, and nothing that you did or tried to do is going to be remembered or is going to have any effect on the world, is tragic. Your efforts to try and refute that, or your efforts to try and defy that, are where comedy happens. So I think it's two separate concepts that a lot of people fail to separate. And that's why a lot of people claim to not understand absurdism. But it's very simply, as long as you continue to look at it that way, you'll be able to appreciate absurdism for what it is. Incomprehensible processes being imposed on a person who's trying to understand them, and eventually they defeat the person, but his efforts to understand them, his or her, sometimes it's women, but Kafka didn't write about women that much. Well, he did, but they weren't the main characters of his stories. But trying to understand the incomprehensible processes that you're faced with is where the comedy happens. The tragedy is the fact that the incomprehensible processes will just defeat you no matter what, whether you fight them or not. And I think that's, aside from the fact that Kafka never actually wrote from a spiritual perspective, but the absurdism of his world translates equally into a spiritual perspective of existentialism. And that's why you're going to find a lot of Christians disapprove of existentialism, that there is no meaning in the world, there's no purpose in life, except for the meaning and purpose that we make. We construct our meaning. And unfortunately for a lot of Kafka's heroes, that meaning is the struggle to find meaning. So that's it in a nutshell. But anyway, so this is the app. This is where to find it. And it is a work in progress, so shout out to the developer. There is lots of joy in this product. Do not hesitate to download it, install it. It doesn't take up a whole lot of space on your phone, so it's really amazing and wonderful. 5 stars from me. 5.